you. Great. Thank you all so much for being here. This is a topic I've become deeply passionate about over the years. It's something I've reflected on, I've studied for years, and so I'm very excited to share it with you tonight. My interest in the question of human identity frankly began with a personal frustration. After I finished grad school and I discovered the Catholic internet, which can be a dangerous place, I noticed many individual Catholics issuing prescriptions, in particular for how women ought to be. And I noticed that these prescriptions were nowhere to be found in the catechism. They did not seem to me to be actually church teaching. And so I grew frustrated and I wanted to know, well, who are women? Like, who am I as a woman? What does that mean? And so I began a deep dive for years, reading a lot of John Paul II, Edith Stein. And while I was doing that deep dive into what it means to be a woman in particular, the society at large had just started discussing gender increasingly. And I noticed that many of the ideas put forth by secular society about gender, about the human body, they didn't seem to me to be correct. They seemed to be contrary, in fact, to human nature. What I heard did not sound right to me, but I couldn't identify precisely what was wrong. And so that led me to eventually discover a book by Abigail Favale called The Genesis of Gender. Has anyone heard of this book? Okay, I cannot recommend it highly enough. If you hear me say one thing, it's, well, God loves you, but also go read The Genesis of Gender, okay? I read this book, I became deeply excited about it. I shared it with Adriana, my housemate / friend / colleague, and she and I actually crafted an elective class at our high school called Catholic Anthropology. And so what I'm sharing with you tonight is not the entire semester-long course, but rather a distillation of some of the foundations of what it means to be a human being. And so that's what I would like to share with you tonight. I owe a great debt to Adriana, to Abigail Favale, and to some other scholars because their ideas are really what I'm presenting to you tonight. So I would like for us to be able to answer this one question at the end of tonight. Who am I? I set a really high bar, but who am I, right? I'm hoping to propose to you an answer for that. Now, I believe that our identity is threefold. I believe in the first place that we are human beings, right? This is one layer of our identity. But in addition to being a human being, we are either a man or a woman. That's a second layer. But in addition to being a human being and a man or a woman, each of us is also an individual. And so I want to propose that we look at all of these layers of our identity one by one. Now, while I'm going to address them separately, in our lived incarnational reality, they are not separate, right? We know this. But rather, these three layers are perfectly united in a single human person. Now, caveat, my talk tonight includes teachings of the Catholic Church found in the Catechism and also Genesis. Additionally, it includes educated beliefs by scholars like John Paul II, Abigail Favale, and it does also include some of my own personal beliefs and opinions. So one of my goals is to make it clear which three we're talking about at a given moment, because I wouldn't want to present a personal belief or an educated opinion as church teaching. So I hope to make those distinctions clear as we go along. Now, I guess if I were to identify more particular goals for tonight, right? A little ahead of time. They would be this, to convince you of the truth of what the Catholic Church teaches about human nature and identity. And I hope to convince you of that truth because I believe that living according to it helps us flourish. So that's my first goal. My second goal is to propose a way for living out the truth of who we are. So now let's go on. We're going to begin with this first layer of identity, being a human being. And we are going to begin in the beginning with the Judeo-Christian origin story, the book of Genesis. Now, a quick word about origin stories. You're going to see my literature teacher coming out here for a moment. For the ancients, origin stories, they taught about a person's identity and their purpose, right? Or the Greek word telos, which means the goal or the purpose to which something is directed, right? The final goal. Now, this role of origin stories was true of the ancient pagans as well as the ancient Hebrews. And so Genesis is the ancient Hebrews' origin story. But for us as Christians, it's our own as well. So that's why we're beginning with Genesis. Now, before we can even look at the text, we have to understand how to approach it, right? This is a literature teacher, I promise you. Whenever we approach a book, we have to be aware of its genre, right? And this goes for the Bible as well. You may already know this, but the Bible is more appropriately thought of as a library of different books instead of as one whole book. Now, within the library of the Bible, all of the books communicate truth, right? It is the divine word of God. And each of those books communicates truth in a different way. And this is where genre comes in. You have to know the genre of the book of the Bible in order to discern its truth. Now, Genesis is a symbolic text. What this means is that it represents something beyond the story itself. And so when we're looking for truth presented in Genesis, we have to go beneath the surface of the story to see what the Holy Spirit is trying to show us. Now, unsurprisingly, our focus today will be the two creation accounts found in Genesis 1 and 2. The Catechism tells us that these creation accounts teach us something about the nature of human beings, about the value of human beings, and also about our place within the whole of creation. All right, let's go to the first one. The main thing I want to highlight about the first creation account is that there is a trajectory present in the order of creation. And by that I mean that each day that is created is more perfect than the one that came before it. So just a few examples. We're not going to go through all 7. On the 4th day, God created the sun, which is pretty cool, right? It gives us light. It helps everything live. We love that. On the 5th day, God created, right, an abundance of living creatures in the water. I like to imagine dolphins, right? They're smart. They're cute. You can swim with them. They're even more perfect than the sun. Why? Because they're alive, right? So we're going upward in the order of creation. And that brings us to our day, right? The 6th day, when God created human beings. This trajectory suggests that we as human beings are even more perfect than all of the elements of creation that came before us. Now, why are we more perfect? I'll come back to that in a little bit. You may wonder why this trajectory. The ancient Hebrews are trying to show which parts of the visible world are higher than the others. The teaching here is in particular directed to the ancient Egyptians. And the teaching is that you cannot worship what is lower than you, right? You cannot worship a river like the Nile. You can't worship the sun and the god Ra. And as wonderful as cats are, I'm a cat person. You can't worship cats, right? Ancient Egyptians had these cat-shaped coffins. This is irrelevant, but I just think it's very funny, right? You can't worship cats. They're lower than we are. But on that 7th day, God didn't create anything, right? He rested. This shows us that the entire visible world is ordered toward God. And it shows us, human beings, that God alone is worthy of our worship, right? So this is the teaching we get in the trajectory of the creation account. Now, I want to go back to the 6th day and look at this question of why are human beings more perfect than the rest of the created world? We find our answer in Genesis 1, verses 26 through 27, right? Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image, after our likeness," right? In that verse I just read, the word used for human beings, sometimes also translated into English as man, that word is Adam, right? This Hebrew word signifies both the creation of the entire human race and the first particular man. Now, this is the case because Hebraic anthropology allows an individual to represent the group as a whole, right? But when we see this creation of Adam, it means both all of humanity and the particular first man. Now, in Genesis 1:27, right? The Hebrew word used for mankind changes. Ha-Adam. Ha is a definite article, right? So the text is now talking about the particular man who was created. And I highlight this really to hammer home a point about Adam, that Adam has to refer to something more general than just the particular man. The creation of Adam in Genesis 1:26 teaches us about the creation of human nature as a whole, right? It teaches about the creation of the human species. And therefore, it teaches us about our identity. So, what do we learn about Adam? Well, the answer lies in this verse. Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image, after our likeness." There's a difference in language when God says this. For the fourth day, for the fifth day, God said, "Let there be," when he brought something into existence. But now, when he creates human beings, he says, "Let us make." It's more personal, right? Something's different about our nature as human beings compared to that of the other creatures, right? Namely, a principle you're all familiar with, I'm sure, that we are created in the image of God, right? What we call imago Dei. This imago Dei means, first, that we have rationality and free will. And it also means that we are created to be in relationship, right? Our triune God is a perfect relationship of persons. So that's what the first creation account gives us. The second account is rich as well. While the first creation account tells us how human beings came into existence and asserts that human beings have a nature that's different from the rest of creation, the second creation account goes into more detail about what constitutes that human nature. So let's look at a few verses that will be very familiar to you, I am sure, right? So we see that the Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground and blew into his mouth the breath of life, right? That verse I just read answers quite a few questions, right? The first is, what is a human being? The dust of the ground is symbolic for the human body, a physical, earthy matter. And the breath of life is symbolic of the human soul. And so this verse in Genesis affirms something called hylomorphism, right? Which is the assertion that hylomorphism means a soul-body unity, right? So Genesis tells us this: we are a union of body and soul. We are not just like a soul hanging out in this flesh sack, right? That's not who we are. We also see in this creation account what a human being is made of. Now, I'll remind you of the fact that Genesis is a symbolic text. Genesis teaches us the theological importance of what we're made of. It does not give us a biological explanation. That is not its role, right? So the material for the man, right, we see is clay, the dust of the ground. It's translated a variety of ways. And the material of the woman is the bone of man. Both of these matters are organic. There's an earthiness to us as human beings. The symbolic meaning is that our earthiness as human beings establishes us as very different from God and lower than him, right? If we pause, this helps us understand the scandal, frankly, of the incarnation. When God took on our earthiness, something lower than him, in order to save us, right? Finally, this part of Genesis answers the question of what is a human being made for, right? Or what is a human being's telos? Genesis hints at human beings having a telos that is very different from the rest of the world. The fact that we are created imago Dei, right, means that we are created in the image of a personal God, right? He desires communion with his creatures. And so this communion, the giving and receiving of love, is our telos, right? This is what we are made for. Its ultimate expression is union with God, but it also finds an expression in union with other people, right? Our relationships here. Now, our telos becomes especially clear in Genesis after the fall, because man's clearest loss is his damaged relationship with God and damaged relationship with others. Now, after looking at the text in depth, I want to highlight what I think are the most two important aspects of our identity as human beings. Earthiness is actually a really good introduction to this. The first is that a human being is a union of body and soul, right? They are both essential parts of human nature. A human being does not exist without both, right? The Catechism affirms this when it says that spirit and matter in man are not two natures united, but rather their union forms a single nature. What this means for us is that we have to take into account both the body and the soul when we're asking questions about identity. Like, for example, we have to remember that we're not angels. We are not pure spirit. We are bodies, and that matters. The second aspect of human identity I want to leave you with is that we have a given nature, right? We didn't bring ourselves into being. We are not our own creators. Because of that, there has to be a creator of our nature who or which is external to us. There has to be a giver of the nature if we are the ones who received it. And in Christianity, we believe and we know that that creator and giver are one and the same. It is God, right? The same God who created the universe is the creator and giver of our nature. The second one in particular, I think, is very important because it has meaningful consequences for how we live. It leaves us with a choice, right? Do we live according to our given nature, or do we fight against it in some way, right? Before making this choice, it's natural to ask, well, do we believe our Creator? Do we trust Him, right? When we come against limitations of our human nature, do we believe that our Creator has good intentions for us, right? Maybe this is something we can take to prayer, because if we don't believe our Creator and if we don't trust Him, and goodness knows that's difficult, right? I'm not standing here as someone who trusts my Creator perfectly. But if we don't believe Him and trust Him, then living according to our given nature will be very difficult, right? All right, let's move on to that second layer of identity, man or woman. By the way, I trust you all will recognize the painting. What may not often be known is that this is Eve. Some of you may know that. But when God is creating Adam, reaching out to touch him, He has Eve under His arm the whole time. He had Eve in mind when He was creating Adam. Anyway, so that's who she is. I think it's beautiful, right? So before diving into what it means to be a man or a woman, I'd like to first define our terms. And then I'd also like to consider a couple of realities about human beings and sexual difference in particular. So I owe these definitions to Abigail Favale. Her definition of woman and man, I think, are the most accurate. So a man is a human being whose body is organized to reproduce outside of itself, right? And conversely, a woman is a human being whose body is organized to reproduce within itself through gestation. Now, I like these definitions first because they're factually correct. I think that's important for a definition. But second, because they're based on potentiality, not actuality, right? So for example, a person who may suffer from infertility, or a person who lives a celibate life and never reproduces, a person who has a disorder of sexual development, right, whose sexed body varies from the norm, all of those people are included in these definitions because their body is still organized in a certain way. So that's why I like these. Now, with those in mind, let's consider a couple of realities about sexual difference in human beings. Right? The first is that All human beings are sexed beings, right? Now, we know this purely on a biological level. Every human being exists as a sexed body, either male or female. There is no sexless human being. And furthermore, all human beings only exist as one of two bodily sexes, male or female. So there is no other or third sex. Now, it is true that a small percentage of people have variations in their sexed bodies. So to use the example of somebody with a disorder of sexual development, these are the folks who are often described as intersex, which is not a very precise term. But someone who has a disorder of sexual development, that disorder is in fact defined relative to the male or the female sex. So someone with a DSD, there is a variation in their sex nature in relation to one or the other, right? That's how these disorders are identified. It's taking the norm of the male or the female sex and noticing a variation within that norm, right? So this affirms that there truly are only two bodily sexes. Now, with all of that in mind, I want to look at why sexual difference even matters for our identity, right? Why is it not just a matter of reproduction? If we believe that both body and soul are equally essential to human nature, right, this ought to show us that being male or female is essential to our identity if we have to take the body seriously. We do not exist apart from our body, and our body does not exist without a sex. John Paul II takes the body very seriously in his theology of the body, right, as the title would suggest. And he can help us understand what meaning we can find in sexual difference. So he believes that the existence of sexual difference actually teaches us something about our nature as human beings in general, and about being a man or a woman in particular. Because men and women are persons, meaning we have inner lives, John Paul II says that we are conscious of our lived experiences of our bodies, and we have the capacity to reflect on that, to draw meaning from that, right? So in other words, being a man or a woman, it goes deeper than just biology alone. And we can look to our nature to answer questions about who we are. Now, Genesis has a lot to say about sexual difference as well, right? It asserts that both man and woman share equally in human nature. So we see this in Genesis 1:26 that we looked at earlier, right? Both man and woman are included in that Hebrew word Adam. So everything said about Adam applies to man and woman alike, right? And in the second creation account, we get an assertion that woman is made of the same stuff or earthiness as man, right? So man and woman, they share the same nature as human beings. They are both lower than God and find their telos in communion with him. Now, Abigail Favale, I'm sure you're noticing a trend. I like the way that she phrases it. She says that man and woman are two ways of being a human being. I find that very helpful. Hopefully you do as well. Now, Genesis also teaches us that sexual difference is an intentional, essential, and good part of creation, right? In Genesis, there is a threefold declaration about the creation of human beings, and male and female are included in that, right? God intentionally made the human race as man and woman. He could have made human beings reproduce any way he wanted. He could have made an entire species that reproduces with one sex, but he didn't. He created us as male and female from the very beginning. It was intentional. Furthermore, Genesis shows us that sexual difference is essential. And this is where we're going to go a little bit more into language. Now, the man and the woman are not referred to as concrete objects of existence in Genesis until they are both on the scene. So at the beginning of this verse, the word used for the man is ha-adam, right? Yes, there is a definite article, but Adam is still something more abstract. Now, once Adam sees Eve, both man and woman have been brought into existence, then the Hebrew words used are much more concrete. Man is called Ish and woman is Shah, right? These Hebrew words refer to concrete physical existence, whereas Adam is more abstract, right? God created the human race as male and female, and so this sexual difference is the norm. And indeed, there would be no human race without that sexual difference. It is essential. The human race has never existed apart from those two sexes. And then finally, the Holy Spirit put it much more simply in telling us that sexual difference is good, right? God said it is not good that man should be alone. Now, Genesis 1 doesn't mention the problem of man being alone because Adam, this abstract term, is only used. But Genesis 2 prompts us to think about the particular man on his own in the visible world. And this is when there's a problem, right? Now, there is a litany of creative acts. And after each act, God says, it was good, right? So we get this litany of creation followed by it was good. And so this part of the text stands out just on the level of language because we see for the first time, oh, something is not good. And this is before the fall, before sin entered the world, right? When the particular man finds himself alone, it is not good, right? This highlights our telos, which is that communion with others, right? The dolphin doesn't cut it for Adam. Right? He can't commune with the dolphin. That's not enough. He needs someone who is bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh to have true communion, a true relationship. Finally, Genesis shows us that sexual difference, in fact, reveals our capacity to give and receive love, right? On the level of biology, the male and female bodies, they fit together, right? They are able to commune. And in fact, the male and female bodies only really make sense when you think about them together. The human species can only survive through the joining of male and female, right? This reveals that the human person is not self-sufficient, right? That he or she is made for communion with others. We are meant to depend on one another, to work with one another, right? Furthermore, because the physical union of man and woman brings new life, something new, something added to the world, that shows us that our capacity for self-gift can in fact add to the world. Something else, something new and good can come from it, right? Our capacity for communion reveals our capacity for fruitfulness, broadly understood. Now, this capacity to give and receive love goes beyond the physical, right? So yes, everything I've said is true of a man and woman who have sex and conceive a child, right? There's a physical union or a physical fruit born of that union. But we're not just talking about the physical, right? This capacity reveals something deeper. I'll remind you that sex and the creation of children doesn't happen in heaven, right? Heaven is our telos. We have to be made for something beyond that as well. When we remember that our telos is to give and receive love, right, we can see the human body, this existence of sexual difference as evidence of that. Like, yes, we are created, should we be called to that vocation, to marriage, to the creation of children. But it also signals something else, right? John Paul II calls this the spousal meaning of the body. That the existence of human beings as male and female reveals our broader capacity to give and receive love. So this is one of the reasons why priests and religious brothers and sisters are symbols of everyone's ultimate vocation, because they are living here on earth an exclusive relationship with God, so to speak, right? Additionally, an exclusive, physical, romantic relationship between husband and wife and the children that may flow from that, those are all natural goods. They are very good, and they are natural goods. But the relationship between a human person and God is a supernatural good. Right? Now, after a lot of talk about the reality of sexual difference and its meaning, I want to dive a little bit more into what does it look like to be a man or a woman in terms of how ought we to live well as a man or a woman. So I'm going to use a lot of John Paul II and another scholar named Dr. Deborah Savage. And yes, you heard that last name correctly. And she's a very humble and demure woman, but she's brilliant. And so I think Savage is a perfect last name for her. But anyway, John Paul II, in his letter to women, he introduces this term genius, which you may have heard, to describe the unique set of gifts given to man and to woman. And so we can think about the masculine genius and the feminine genius as unique expressions of the image and likeness of God. So John Paul II did much to write about the feminine genius in particular. Dr. Savage is the one who's trying to make up for the lack of study into the masculine genius. Now, John Paul II, in a different work, Love and Responsibility, he suggests that there is a biological foundation for woman's unique approach to the human person, right? He believes that what's unique about her body reveals what is particular about her as a person. And so John Paul II considers the fact that a woman's cycle prepares her every month to welcome new life. And when that new life is created, she is intimately connected with it immediately, right? John Paul II takes this biological reality and argues that it has a meaning for woman's particular attunement to the human person. JP2 says that women are especially disposed to welcome life and to pay close attention to the human person. Now, in Letter to Women, he expands that argument, saying that woman makes an especially significant contribution to the social dimension of life, right? That's where she excels. So if we had to describe the feminine genius briefly, we could say that woman is especially focused on the human person, whom she tends to prioritize over utilitarian goals. Now, if you're like, well, hey, I'm that way too, I'll get there. I'll have a caveat, don't worry. We can share. All right. Now, the masculine genius, really we owe a great debt to Dr. Deborah Savage for this thought. So she uses Genesis and also John Paul II's argument about the feminine genius to propose an idea of what the masculine genius entails. So when she looks at Genesis, she observes that while God gives man and woman the common task of having dominion over the earth, only the man is given a specific task. And that is to work, to care for the things in creation, to cultivate them. Furthermore, it is only the man whom God asks to name all the animals, suggesting his particular capacity to know creation. And so Dr. Deborah Savage describes a masculine genius this way. She says that man excels at discovering what things are, how they are distinct from one another, and what they are for. And his genius isn't just for the sake of doing these things, but it is rather to use his capacity to know and use the goods of creation in order to facilitate human flourishing, right? So there is an end to his knowledge. Human beings are the only creatures who have to master their environment, who create conditions for their own flourishing. And so Dr. Savage would say that man is especially suited for this, creating conditions in which human beings can flourish. Now, if any of you women are like, but I'm this way, I have a few caveats. So allow me to give you some caveats in case you have some internal counter arguments. So caveat number one, the geniuses suggest something that is true on average for man and woman. Not every man will possess every aspect of the masculine genius. Not every woman will possess every aspect of the feminine genius. My second caveat is that, as I mentioned, men and women can possess gifts that, quote, or belong to the other genius, right? We can share. And then finally, respecting sexual difference and observing that these things are true on average doesn't mean we have to believe in biological determinism, right? We don't have to believe that All events, all of our human actions are ultimately determined by our biology, right? So these caveats flow nicely into a discussion of identity at the individual level, right? It is the Catechism that says differences among persons belong to God's plan, right? Our existence as an individual matters. It matters because it matters to God. When the Catechism talks about the importance and the meaning of the Christian name, it says that God calls each one by name. This emphasizes the reality that God engages with us not just as a group of human beings, but as individuals, right? Furthermore, these differences among human persons are willed by God. They're part of His providence. The existence of our differences actually reflects something about who we are as human beings. It reflects that we need each other, right? I just discovered these parts of the Catechism 2 days ago, but they're really beautiful, right? They're really beautiful. So I'm here to share my fervor with you. So the Catechism says, on coming into the world, man is not equipped with everything he needs for developing his bodily and spiritual life. He needs others. Why? Because the talents are not distributed equally. God, in His providence, creates us with different abilities and within different circumstances that further shape us, right? This shows that we need each other. The Catechism goes on to assert that these differences truly are part of God's plan, right? And that they give us an opportunity to live out charity. If God has endowed you with a talent, He's asking you in charity to share that with others, right? This all highlights our telos, communion with other people. So in addition to what the Catechism says about individual differences, I would argue that our rationality and free will naturally lead to differences as well. No two of us use our intellect and will in the same way. And so we're going to be shaped differently, right? We are the combination of our nature and our acts of intelligence and will. And then finally, to return to an earlier point, like God saves us one by one, right? He has a unique vocation, a unique call for each person that is part of his or her salvation. God works with us to save us as individuals. And I think because of that, our individuality matters too, right? God doesn't just treat us as a clump of people. Now, like my students may be asking, who cares, right? So what? So what? This is nice. Should I care, right? Does this knowledge actually impact me? What if I disagree, right? Or maybe in this room, what if someone I love and know disagrees? Does that have any meaningful impact on our life? And I would say, yes, it does, right? Because our beliefs about who we are inform how we live. And so the point of this whole thing is to know who we are so we know how to live well, right? All three layers of our identity reveal our telos, communion with others and with God. Our nature as human beings tells us that we are creatures, not creator. Our existence as man or woman reveals our capacity for fruitful relationship with others. And our existence as an individual, including those differences, reveals our limitations and our consequent dependence on others, but it also reveals the particular gifts we have and are meant to share with other people. So my invitation to you is this, is to seek integration, right? Integration is the union of all aspects of our person, our human nature, our nature as man or woman, and our individuality, right? It's the union of our material body, including its limitations, and our immaterial soul, including our differences. If we seek integration and live according to that full reality of who we are, then no part of ourselves is left behind. And I believe that all part of ourselves will be brought towards union with God. Thank you.